Welcome to the Dialectic. This is Atul Singh, the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer. With me is retired CIA officer Glenn Carle. Between the two of us, the Rajput and the Wasp, we are discussing something extremely important today. Those of you who followed us know that we've covered Europe, we've covered Germany, and we've covered France in our last three podcasts. Today we are moving east. Today we are covering India. Our topic today, or the title of our episode today, is Narendra Modi's vegetarian Stalinism has ruined the Indian economy. So, hey ho, there we go, Glenn.
Yes, well, hello everyone, and you, Atul. I literally laughed out loud when I read the pithy title that you came up with, and it begs the question, really, what in the world are you talking about? So today we are going to talk about, but actually you are going to explain India today. And what vegetarian Stalinism means, and how it has arrived at whatever that is. So, to begin, though, you have to dispel the image that I have of a bearded sage seizing the wheat and rice from hapless and helpless untouchables, who are then left to nourish themselves on fading socialist posters and decrepit train stations. That's what Stalinism overlaid on India calls to my probably stereotyped mind. Well, tell me what it actually means and what India is and was and how it's come to be as it is, and what Prime Minister Modi is doing about it or has done to it.
So let us start with what we mean by vegetarian Stalinism. Well, Stalinism was rather brutal. You got packed off to the gulag. You often got tortured and shot. If you had teenage daughters, the lovely chap, this head of secret police Beria, would rape them, perhaps bury them in his own compound. Now,
Atul, if I could jump in just for a second, the thought comes to me that since I'm old and politics has been my life, Stalinism immediately conjures all sorts of quite concrete meaning, politically, socially, and in many other ways.
Economically.
But we are 37 years past the fall of the Berlin Wall. And as I say on occasion, the only places where Marxism remains alive are in American and European campuses.
Indian campuses too. For everybody who studies humanities in India.
Well, that's it. I was just going to say all of the literati remain Marxist tinged. But facetiousness aside, just for a moment, let me say in only a sentence or two what Stalinism really is. It is an evolution out of Marxism, which believes that society is deterministic and goes through several stages, capitalism being the last stage of social development before socialism, which is when the control of all levels, means of production pass to the workers and to the state, but the state dissolves because the workers control everything. It's really quite a theology of fuzzy ideals.
And it is a theology. I completely concur.
Yes,
it is
absolutely.
A theology. I mean, and lest we forget, Joseph Stalin was training to be a priest. He walked out from his seminary, and in came Karl Marx's tomes, and out went the Bible.
It's a very important point. It truly is. Now it's diagnostic capabilities or strengths. Looking backward, it's a powerful tool with some fundamental flaws, but nonetheless with some merit. Looking forward, it's as fuzzy-minded as any utopian. But worse than that, and this is why I wanted to interrupt you, what happened is that if all power, the way communism came to take power anyplace, come into power, was through an elite saying, well, the masses need help, and we will be the vanguard of the proletariat, we, the Communist Party, and seize power from those who exploit. And they did. They destroyed the Tsar of Russia and the nationalists and lords in China, and then they assumed all power. And as left-wing ideologies do, they gave to themselves the right to tell people what the truth was and how to be free. This goes back to Rousseau, that the power, I can force you to be free, which is, of course, totalitarian. Now, Joseph Stalin was murderous, and not just murderous. He was genocidal, actually. And
I think genocidal is the right term. I mean, millions were packed off to the gulag, the kulaks.
Literally millions. 8 million people out of 20, I think it was at the time, in Ukraine. 20 or 30 million in Russia, which was a quarter of the population, all because theoretically they held the wrong views and had to be liquidated. And in practice, because many of them were viewed as potential independent minds or challengers to the complete control of power by the ruling elite, which meant one man ruling it all, Joseph Stalin.
And,
so that's
and he was from
is.
Georgia, lest we forget, and he was paranoid. He was completely paranoid, and many people died for nothing. Even dyed-in-wool communists were just backed off on mere suspicion. I mean, he began by destroying his fellow communist leaders who could be potential rivals. And even when you fled as far away as Mexico, as Trotsky did, a murderer followed you and put an axe in your head.
Because it is totalitarian. It wishes to control all economic activity, all political activity, all social activity, and all thought. This is not an exaggeration. It is grotesque and terrifying. And that is what Stalin did to Russia and what Stalinism is. So vegetarian Stalinism is a strange concept, but the marriage of Indian heritage with this communist ideology as interpreted by Stalin is bizarre and terrifying. And that's what I wanted to have as laying a background for you to elaborate for us.
Brilliant. So very quickly, let us begin with this very clear idea that this is a metaphor. And this is a metaphor which has some jest and irony in it, so please don't take it literally. What do we mean by vegetarian Stalinism here? We don't mean that Narendra Modi is wedded to an ideology per se, although he has some ideology. What we mean here is that he has adopted Stalinism in its 2 or 3 forms. Number one, he wants all power with himself in the country, a complete concentration of power. Number 2, he is using the apparatus of the state, and ironically, instead of the communist bureaucracy, he's using a colonial-era bureaucracy, which the British bequeathed us, to control everything he can in the state. And of course, it's not communist as in he's not nationalizing everything, but what he's doing is that he has created a coalition between big business, who back his election campaigns, bureaucracy, and the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is his party, which used to be a relatively more pro-free market party compared to the Congress Party or the Janata Party, which were more left-leaning. But now it has been reduced to a personality cult that worships Modi. So he's imposing his vision of control through an elite, a rarefied elite. There are probably 5,000-6,000 IS officers. Every year there's an exam, they get in, and there are some allied services, those who don't get into the top, but the other services. And then the third thing, and this is really important, is that there is no feedback loop. Just as Stalin had lost the feedback loop, Narendra Modi is not killing people. Actually, Indians are better fed than before. Indians are arguably taller than before. They have better drinking water than before. So there are real achievements to Narendra Modi's 10 years, and we will give him credit where credit is due. But the feedback loop that exists in a more free market economy have ceased to exist. So the economy is spluttering, and that is what I mean by vegetarian Stalinism. And it is a strange society in which you're not sent off to the gulag, but the enforcement directorate or the income tax or the Central Bureau of Investigation shows up at your door, and you have a legal case, and you may fight the legal case interminably for 10 years or 20 years, and you may be ruined by going to the court again and again and again, and not even being found guilty. So it is death by 1,000 cuts. It's a different form of torture.
That sounds. We know from the Beatles, or those of us old enough to know the Beatles, that the tax man always comes. That was a big hit in 1966. And of course, the saying in English is that there are only two things that are certain: one is death, and the other are taxes. So this raises the issue that I want you to tell us. What is actually going on? Looked at from outside as a non-Indian India follower, the picture that has been painted and that one thinks that one sees, at least in part, is that Modi and his party have said that they wanted to centralize the economy and deregulate the economy and energize the private sector. That there's been a sea change in Indian culture, at least among the ruling elites, recognizing that colonial centralization and top-down government and socialist economies are less able to provide growth and wealth and health and so on than a regulated market economy, and that huge changes are underway. When I was in India, the infrastructure projects that I saw were pretty impressive. Very anecdotal and very partial view, but I did see that. So what actually is happening then? What is Modi doing to the economy? And does he? And I'm not being facetious. Does he know what he's doing? Does he believe that what he's doing is the opposite of what it is that's actually happening? Many socialists I've known quite sincerely told me that everything was going as well as possible in the best of all possible worlds, even as their economies and societies were imploding. So tell me what's happening, and where is that very thin picture or impression wrong or right?
So let's give credit where credit is due. So where has Narendra Modi achieved a fair bit? Infrastructure. He has an outstanding minister, Nitin Gadkari. Nitin is efficient. Nitin is dynamic. He has built roads, ports. Airports have come up as well. So we've had I wouldn't say first world infrastructure, but decent infrastructure come up in a country of potholes and poor connectivity and whatnot. So infrastructure, historically, India's weakness is in a much better state. Then let's look at micro welfare. India had a lot of leakages in its welfare programs. Much of the money was stolen. It never reached the poor. There were lots of schemes for the poor. Remember, Indira Gandhi declared India to be a socialist country back in the 1970s after imposing the emergency. Actually, that was 51 years ago. She locked up the entire opposition and declared India to be a socialist country. Amended the constitution, changed the preamble to the constitution. And despite all those schemes, a lot of them were just stolen by the bureaucracy along the way. Now you have direct bank transfers. You have a universal identification scheme, ID called Aadhaar, which actually the previous government began, the Congress party, but which the BJP has implemented. So there are solid achievements. Digital payments as well. You can pay digitally everywhere. So that is a big step that eases transactions and should give a fillip to the economy. However, there have been some major downsides to his economic policy making, and I would argue that he's not terribly well educated. He began as a tea seller by the train station. He's obviously super sharp. He's cunning. He's charismatic. He connects with the people. He's a decent orator. He wins election after election. So I wouldn't have the snobbish, patronizing view of him as a lot of people do. But he does not understand economics and he does not understand policy making. His instincts are very much that of a control freak. And he thinks he will wave the wand and the elephant will dance. And so if you look at growth rates, yes, they have been decent. In general, they have been high. Of course, they have been volatile because we've had external shocks, the 2007-2008 crisis. This is before Modi, but after Modi came to power, he made blunders. We'll go into that later. Two of them withdrawing all currency notes suddenly, arbitrarily, imposing a new taxation system in the middle of the financial year, then COVID, all of that. But on the whole, we have to be careful about getting impressed by high growth rates, because when you begin from a low base, anyone who's read any economics knows you can grow faster. The per capita income in 2024, as per the World Bank, was only $2,694.7. So $2,694.7 per year. That's not great per capita income at all. You can say it partly that's because of colonization, partly whatever, but not great. Immigration. Close to 1 million Indians have renounced their citizenship over the last 5 years. There's a massive talent and capital flight to Singapore, to Dubai, to Australia, to the UK, to the US, and elsewhere, really. The falling rupee, which the BJP and Narendra Modi complained about. The rupee was less than 60 rupees per dollar, or 60 rupees to a dollar when Narendra Modi was elected. And now it is more than 90 rupees per dollar. Now it is 90 rupees to the dollar. Obviously, this leads to inflationary pressures. Inflation was supposedly 0.71% in November and 1.33% in December. Of course, there's fear that government is fiddling the numbers. Even so, the claim of moderate and controlled inflation is largely true. So perhaps we can give some credit here. But then remember, under Narendra...
Atul, what about the growth rates you talked about? If we can jump back just for a little bit for a moment. How does Modi's administration and tenure compare with the
Manmohan
baseline
Singh.
of from
Manmohan Singh.
independence up until Modi? Have growth rates increased compared to that, or are they roughly the same, or less, or how?
So we'll get into it in detail when we get on to discuss the history. But very quickly,
Okay.
Growth rates under Manmohan Singh was 7.7%. This is Narendra Modi's predecessor, who was voted out in 2014. He had a 10-year stint from 2004 to 2014. Under Narendra Modi, for all the hype, growth rates have been on an average 6.8%. So he has not matched the growth rates of Manmohan Singh. So yes, inflation is lower, on average 5.1% per year. And Manmohan Singh's government had an average inflation rate of 8.1% a year. So inflation, is lower, a 5.1% instead of 8.1%, but then growth is also lower, 6.8% in contrast to 7.7%. Now the main quibble a lot of economists, investors, and astute observers of India have is the suspicion of fiddling with numbers. And the International Monetary Fund has given India a C grade, which is its second lowest for its national accounts data. Now, A is adequate, B is broadly adequate. These are the two ratings of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. But a C rating means economists, investors, and policymakers fail to get a completely accurate and timely picture of the Indian economy. And I know from friends in the IMF and the World Bank, and indeed Indian officials in senior positions in the government, including in the Ministry of Finance, that the Modi government has cooked up numbers and gamed World Bank indices. Just to give you one quick example.
It's intentional obfuscation. It's not just the friction of inefficiency.
No. Obviously, they'll say it off the record. They will never come on our podcast and say so. But you and I know some people in common. Shall we leave it at that? The government has made it, just to give you a simple example, the government has made it super easy to get electricity in Delhi and Jaipur, which are two cities the World Bank measures. Elsewhere, good luck. So the improvement in ease of doing business, the improvement in the rankings is really myth, as any business person will tell you. And the IMF, we could go on, but we won't. The IMF findings, say that India uses an outdated base year. It uses 2011 and 2012 for calculating real GDP. And the structure of the economy has changed. It doesn't fully capture new sectors like digital services. It has flawed deflation methods, and basically that is probably to juice up GDP figures. It has unexplained discrepancies. I could go on. We don't want to regurgitate what the IMF has already said, but the bottom line is that the figures, especially the inflation figures, got my mother to remark that either Nirmalanomics is right or Sudhanomics is right. And what she meant by this, Nirmala Sitharaman is the finance minister of India and Sudha Singh is my mother. And she said, the two of us, your dad is in his 80s, I'm in my 70s. We go and get groceries every morning. We get milk, we get vegetables. Groceries for 2 days often cost 800 rupees. And so that's used less than $10. It doesn't seem much, but remember their pensions are in rupees. And she said, I just cannot fathom how inflation can be below 1%. So either Nirmala or either the Indian government is completely unaware, or it is intentionally lying. And so she said, Nirmalanomics, which is the economics that Nirmala Sitharaman projects and speaks about and waxes lyrical on stage and on television or wherever she goes and speaks. And Sudhanomics, the experience of the housewife, or the matron, the matriarch of the family running a household budget, they do not correspond.
Well, that sounds distressing, but how does this compare to the earlier baseline? Are they
The numbers were more
in line
reliable
with
earlier.
fecklessness, or are
The
they
numbers were
worse?
the numbers were more reliable earlier. Look, we never had spectacular economic growth. Everyone talks about the East Asian miracle. No one talks about the South Asian miracle, and for good reason. So, the Hindu rate of growth, which you would remember, but most people don't. The Hindu rate of growth was infamous for being infernally slow in India, or infernally low in India for a while. So, yes, sluggish economic performance is not new. And this brings us on to history, really, because India did liberalize in 1991. So perhaps this is time to jump into history, what we always do. We did with in the previous podcast, and perhaps it is time.
Okay. Pardon my coughing. It's a seasonal thing. Well, so you've painted a distressing what is happening. So that raises the obvious question that comes to mind is, well, why is that the case, and is it worse? So tell us why there is a Modi and a BJP, and what he's trying to do, how he came to be, and what is different from before, how we got to this place that we're at now.
So let's begin in 1947. With 1947, or in 1947. That is the year India becomes independent, 2 years after World War II. August 15th is when the Japanese surrender. Lord Louis Mountbatten, in a press conference, announces India would be independent on the same day because it's the happiest day of his life. So the British decide, okay, it's time for us to leave, pull up the drawbridge, go back to our green and pleasant isle. And they leave India. And when they leave India, things are pretty dire. India has been stripped bare. Life expectancy is pretty low. I think it was 32. I may be wrong. We'll have to check that. All the statistics in 1947 were pretty grim. And at that point, India chooses socialism. And there are good reasons why India chose socialism. Number one, India had been traumatized by exploitation, in which the British East India Company, and it was Robert Clive who conquered Bengal in 1757. It wasn't troops representing the Queen or the King. It wasn't King George's troops. This company was rapacious, led to famine, and capitalism got a very bad name, and they were looking for alternatives, and they were seduced by the Soviets. Some would say metaphorically, some would say literally, doesn't matter. The reality is that they genuinely thought, and not all of them, but quite a few people, and Jawaharlal Nehru succeeded Mahatma Gandhi, and it's important to
both statements are true, figuratively and literally. That is true. Yeah. The Soviet communist intelligence services were the Communist International Organization existed expressly to spread communism, foment revolution, and the intelligence services were the finest in the world.
They were the top of the tops. Yeah.
That is literally true, but it's also true, and anyone who knows me for probably 30 seconds, I think, will know that I'm hardly a defender of communism. But in the context of 1945, when the world had been for 400 years dominated by the West, and capitalism defined everything as it does, the work by Lenin, Stalin's predecessor, which is imperialism is the final stage of capitalism, is a very powerful framework to understand the world in, particularly if one is a colonial subject of an imperial power. The imperial powers were all Western. They were all capitalist. They were all most of the world was under a colonial control, and the only parties that vigorously opposed colonialism were, other than nationalists around the world in India or Argentina or wherever else, were the Soviet Union and we'll put the intelligentsia everywhere aside as feckless, were the Soviet Union and the United States. But the United States paid lip service to it and didn't do a lot. And they were the ultimate capitalist power and the inheritor of the British Raj and colonies and empire, essentially. And so the Soviet Union actually did support nationalist anti-colonialist movements and was not capitalist. So the appeal is powerful if you're, I think, Indian in 1945.
Yes, and remember that Jawaharlal Nehru was a Brahmin, a Kashmiri Brahmin, and he was Gandhi's chosen successor. And he was ideological. He didn't come from a trading caste, unlike Mahatma Gandhi. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Gandhi's real name, he came from the trading caste. He believed in small businesses. He believed in largely free markets. He believed in a smaller state, a more vigorous civil society. Jawaharlal Nehru had gone to Cambridge, and Cambridge was a hotbed of left-leaning philosophers those days. Jawaharlal Nehru had become a Fabian socialist. He had visited the Soviet Union. He was taken by Soviet intelligence to fake factories where actors would pose as workers and managers, and they would be eating together in the classless society of the future. The future had arrived. And he thought, really, I think, idealistically, that was the vision for India. And India inherited an imperial state. So whilst it became a democracy, it was at the same time an imperial state, a shadow empire. There were widely disparate parts, yoked together in a national project. Nehru tried to come up with a vision of diversity, unity in diversity, and an egalitarian society where everyone was equal before the law. He did do many idealistic things, and the other leaders who had just fought for independence kept some checks and balances on him, and some of them were more to the right, such as Rajagopalachari, Gandhi's relative. His son married Rajaji's daughter, and Rajagopalachari was a Tamil Brahmin, but he was someone who wanted freer markets. But as Nehru stayed in power, he died in 1964. He had and he was prime minister. He controlled the imperial state, and we became some sort of an elected monarchy even by the end of his life. And he did many things that arguably were visionary. He started the Indian Institutes of Technology. He insisted India was to be a secular state. He tried to create a public sector, some of which was needed at the time. He created big dams. He brought in 5-year plans inspired by the Soviet Union. All of that is true, but at the end of the day, he was using a colonial bureaucracy to impose socialism. So Harshan Kumarasingham, who's one of our authors and a noted academic, a Sri Lankan Tamil who grew up in New Zealand, married to a Polish woman who lives in Scotland, he has come up with this idea of the Eastminster model, that the colonies followed the Eastminster model because they never had the tradition of lively debate, discussion, the entire heritage of Anglo-Saxon philosophy. The viceroy basically was representative of the king or the queen and ruled ultimately with an iron fist. I mean, there was a velvet glove. over the iron fist. It wasn't Nazi Germany, but make no mistake, the viceroy was de facto ruler. And when you moved into those colonial bungalows, remember that when the white man left, the bungalows or the colonial mansions weren't suddenly made public institutions. The Brown Sahib moved into those very bungalows. And the colonial bureaucracy suddenly had overweening powers and became even more power drunk because India adopted socialism. In particular, this happened under Indira Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter, who was charismatic, decisive, capable in many ways, but also paranoid, a control freak, and very dynastic. And under her rule, the Indian Administrative Service, which is the top of the civil services, and I'll give you a little bit of a quick insight into them. The Indian Civil Administrative Service is a descendant of the Indian Civil Service, which the British created to rule the empire. It was called the steel frame of the empire. And they created similar services in Nigeria, in Malaysia, in Kenya, and so on and so forth. And what does that mean? Elected mayors have no power. A youngster who's 25 to 30, maybe more towards 30, rules 5 million, 10 million people at sometimes is basically the god of the district. His name in those days, and now there are both men and women in these jobs, was the collector, and the job was literally to collect revenue. And so initially, when you were young, you ran the district, then you moved up, you ran a province, or now we call them state, and then you decided policy for all of India. And the
so
IAS...
It sounds to me that you are giving a object proof of Montesquieu's insight, one of the great thinkers of history about society.
Oh, I adore Montesquieu, as you know. I think the world of Montesquieu and his idea of separation of powers and checks and balances.
And they're absent a vibrant civil society, that it doesn't matter what your ideals and aspirations are and what your leaders do, because without that, all you have are the leaders in a top-down government, which will not be a functioning democracy or economy.
Exactly. And so India was a political democracy, but India was, you had political freedom. You could vote. You had freedom of speech, which you didn't have in many countries. But India did not have economic freedom. In fact, you couldn't even take stuff outside your district. India wasn't even one economy. The EU was a much more integrated economy than India for decades. It's only recently India has become one economy. But in those days, the IAS were the real rulers of India, and one of them boasted that I'm not rich, I'm not powerful, I'm not a Nobel Prize winner, but India's leading business leader, I can make him wait for an hour or 2 or 3 as long as I want outside my door, because he needed approval. And so India became what I call a Babu state. Our mutual friend Ishtiaq Ahmed, the professor emeritus at Stockholm University in Sweden, has called Pakistan a garrison state. I call India a Babu state. Babu is a pejorative word for a bureaucrat. And the nationalization of banks, Indira Gandhi's 1969 nationalization of banks, her hard embrace of socialism, her extraordinary seduction by the Soviet model, because Nehru was a Fabian socialist. Indira was far more hardline. Indira's destruction of inner-party democracy, promotion of her dynasty, her son in particular, Sanjay Gandhi, who died in an air crash, but then her other son, Rajiv Gandhi, was well-meaning and had reformist tendencies. But the promotion of her dynasty meant that she ruled through the IAS. She had to destroy the leaders of her own party so that there would be no rivals for power. And the IAS is the entry through a competitive exam. And you have reservation, i.e. affirmative action for our American listeners, for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes, which VP Singh brought about. He comes from the same clan as me, so a distant relative as well, and he was prime minister, and so he's considered Judas for destroying meritocracy, and a messiah by some for enabling upward mobility into the elite. But the reality is the civil services exam, which is an annual exercise that 1 million students write, and then about 1,000 get in and about 100 get into the IAS, is the biggest leap in social mobility for any young person. If you miss that, you will never hold the reins of power unless you're lucky enough to win the highest of high political offices, because mayors have no power, ministers have no power, legislators have no power. India has elected monarchies. So the prime minister rules the country with the help of IAS officers. So the PMO is all powerful. And the chief minister rules the state through IAS officers. So that is, in a nutshell, what happens in India. So if you think Lena is bad, Enarchs are bad, they know nothing yet, because IAS officers have fortunes of 100 million to 500 million easily, because they control everything and you cannot get anything done without bribing them. I'm not saying all of them. Some of them are indeed honest. But when, the cliche goes that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and they have absolute power and no accountability. So, they can do what they want.
Clearly what comes to mind for me as an American, but one with many years experience in being shaped by my time in France, is how this contrasts radically with the American approach, or the French, or the British approach, or most others perhaps. The American approach in the foreign service and in the military is to have outstanding generalists who are considered to have, one hopes, the best judgment, but to have them preside over, lead, manage experts, substantive and functional experts. So in the military context, the commander of the ship will know how to be a navigator and will know how to be a combat control officer, but that's not his profession. His profession is to lead the combat control officer and the navigation officer. In the British model, it's different. One becomes a navigator or a combat control officer, and so on. In the French context, and you're describing the Indian one, over half of all cabinet ministers in the French government since 1945 are graduates of one school, which is the equivalent, roughly, of the IAS that you're describing in India.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can praise their outstanding expertise and knowledge, but the belief of underpinning the American approach is to try to create possibilities for people to perhaps blossom from different backgrounds. That if you don't go to Harvard, as only 1,500 people a year can, you still may be an Einstein, even if you live someplace that and you couldn't afford to go, or you had a bad day that day on the tests for the entrance exam and so on. And if you go to a community college for a pittance that accepts everybody, you can nonetheless rise up, possibly through.
Look, neither Steve Jobs nor Elon Musk went to Harvard. Steve Jobs was a dropout.
So that's a radically different system, and
yes.
I have been very impressed by my counterparts from India and from France, the two countries that we just talked about, for their outstanding expertise. However, they also do represent a far more striated system, which would keep, a patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, named Einstein, from ever having a chance. So that does seem to be a fundamental issue.
Yes, but I will modify your understanding a little bit. So the people you met at the time you did were of a different were cut from a different cloth. The civil services have degenerated tremendously. And why? Because there is no domain specialization. You go straight at the top. So you don't learn anything. You go to become a sahib. Let's take the example of the US Treasury and the US State Department. They recruit separately. The CIA and the FBI recruit separately. And you've told me the CIA tended to pick up ex-Ivy League people, and the FBI picked up working class people who were young men and women who were hungry. Completely different recruitment process, and actually different characters. In India, everyone from the auditors to the taxmen, and the auditors are Indian Audit and Accounts Service, the taxmen are Indian Revenue Service, and then the investigators who come from the Indian Police Service, and the intelligence professionals who also come from the Indian Police Service quite often, but not always. And of course, the Indian Administrative Service, the IAS. Everyone writes the same annual examination, and you can write it with any subject you want, English literature or physics, and one general studies. I won't go into the details, but it is one exam that selects all the services. So you're not testing for aptitude. You're not testing even for attitude, because everyone is writing for the gold medal, the IAS. And everyone is bitter that they had an off day and they didn't get the IAS, so they are stuck in the IPS, so they are stuck in the IRS. And so there is no aptitude, no test for aptitude. Most people have the wrong attitude going in. I mean, most people going into the IAS are going into the IAS for a fat dowry and lots of bribes and medieval power. So even if they get the IAS, they have the wrong attitude. And if they don't, then mein Gott, they are going to be the non-Brahmins suffering under the IAS officers. And if they've come through reservations, if they've come from the categories, the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, and the other backward classes, then the upper castes who had a higher rank but have a lower service are seething with resentment. So you've got this classic passive-aggressive, no interest in work, fixation with process, where the process becomes the purpose, all of that. Now, and then there's no accountability. Because the judicial system is broken, because we do not have a decent investigation and prosecution arm of the government, you can steal all you want. And a senior IAS officer whom you met briefly said, and he's very witty, he said that the steel frame, STEEL frame of India, has become the steel frame, STEAL, steel frame of India. So it is a rapacious, rent-seeking, extractive colonial bureaucracy with no sense of noblesse oblige.
Is this different today than it was in 1948?
Yes. At that time, India was newly independent. People had power, but they weren't putting their fingers in the cookie jar. They weren't stealing taxpayer money. Now, because there's no belief left in the idea of creating a new India or a socialist India, and no social constraints left. It is less elitist than before, certainly. Then it was very elitist. People came from a few colleges and a few schools. But now it is much more corrupt. So it's become more democratized and more corrupt. But democratized only to the extent of, yes, people get in from different parts of the country and from different castes, etc. But once they get into the IAS, they will be the Surveyor General of India, which under British rule used to be a military officer. The Archaeological Survey of India is headed by an IAS, which under British rule used to be an archaeologist. The Reserve Bank of India is headed by an IAS, not by an economist. In the US, in the EU, in the UK, in Japan, and even in communist China, an economist or, at most a corporate lawyer like Christine Lagarde heads the central bank. In India, the IAS head the central bank as well. So the IAS occupies the commanding heights of not only the state, but also the economy. I will repeat. In India, the IAS occupies the commanding heights of not only the state, but also the economy. Now, in 1990-1991, things eased a little bit. The Gulf War and the collapse of the Soviet Union led to a balance of payments crisis. India had to send its gold to get dollars. And what happened was that India did liberalize its economy. India increased the ease of doing business. India then had growth, and decent growth for a while. And there was an amelioration to the Babu Raj. The IAS became less powerful, and so did the other services. The state became less draconian. But since 2014, that tide has reversed.
You're describing you've placed a lot of emphasis on the one structural component of the exam structure and therefore the ruling heights of the government. I wonder and you include a strong moral component that power corrupts and all power corrupts, absolutely. I wonder to what extent that is the case. I'm sure all of the above will be true, but to what extent that is the case, or if my inclination would be to ascribe the problem to a broader systemic crisis, or not, if not crisis, sclerosis, where change can't come, and you can't have alternative views or dynamism because of this frozen system, and you could have heroic IAS laureates, often some state someplace, working 25 hours a day, and it won't
there are some heroic IAS officers, and indeed officers in other services too, IPS officers or IRS officers or IFS officers. Even diplomats come through the same exam. So you'll find 5 to 10% of them are heroic. But because the state fundamentally is a flailing state, it's not a failing state, but it's certainly a flailing state. And the state has too much power, and the civil society is too weak, and the markets are not free, and businesses face such a heavy burden. Neither the economy nor society can function healthily. So I agree with you. There is a broader systemic problem. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, pardon me. So you described structural elements, or not elements, a framework that one must work within the framework that exists. One can try to change it, but that's what exists. So how does this play out now? Why then are things alarming or distressing as you describe them?
I think there's been a range of reasons. I think electoral politics is one. You may remember that Manu Sharma and I coined the term Sanatan Socialism in 2018. It was a play on the word Sanatan Dharma, which is the term Indians used to use for Hinduism. So we said this is a Hindu socialism. And then Arvind Subramaniam, who was chief economic advisor, chief economic counselor, he advised Narendra Modi. He's much more famous than both of us. He coined the term New Welfarism in 2020. His new book is out as well, A Sixth of Humanity or something. And what did this Sanatan socialism mean, or New Welfarism, if we want to take Arvind's term? It meant that the provision of women's bank accounts, electricity, sanitation, and cooking fuel, all of these improved. So to win elections, they tried to deliver this because women vote, and if they have a bank account, and if they get electricity and sanitation and cooking fuel, all good, and no one can argue against it. But it happened at a time. It happened at a time when India needed to become more competitive, not just distribute, not just divvy up the cake, but bake a bigger cake. And that is where politicians lost focus, because their focus was on the next election, and the bureaucrats, the IAS, didn't want to give away power. They wanted to regain the power they had lost in 1991. They had spent 20 years feeling a little less special, and once Modi won, in particular, they could appeal to his paranoid tendencies. Modi is quite like Indira Gandhi. I often jokingly say that Narendra Modi is the true son of Indira Gandhi. Rahul Gandhi is not exactly the real grandson of Indira. Because Narendra Modi is paranoid, he is undercutting leaders in his own party, he doesn't trust any elected leader, every elected leader is a potential rival. So the only people he's comfortable with are faceless bureaucrats. In that sense, he's very Stalinist. And the IAS was able to sell him the story that, look, we are the best and the brightest, we've cleared the toughest exam in the world, which is true. No one is as sharp as us, therefore we will administer the policies that will keep you king forever or emperor forever. Now, this has led to government expenditure on infrastructure, which is fine, which is good, I would argue. It has a multiplier effect. You and I have spoken about it. But it has led to populist schemes such as Ladli Behan Yojana, Darling Sister Scheme. So which means you give goodies to people, you give subsidies to the poor, 810 million. I will repeat the figure for our listeners in Europe and North America and first world countries. 810 million people get 5 kilograms of free food grains every month.
Well, here's the obvious capitalist roaders question: is that sustainable? Literally, can a society or any government pay for this over any sustained period of time?
Exactly. I'll get to that. And this is, I was about to say, and this is not to mention direct bank transfers to the poor, the old, and women in Bihar, where the BJP, Narendra Modi's party, just won an election. All women got 10,000 rupees in their bank. This is a lot of money for 15% of their per capita income. This is a state that is like sub-Saharan Africa. It is probably the poorest, one of the poorest, if not the poorest state. And the Narendra Modi government has gone back on pension reforms. It is offering unaffordably generous pensions to retired government employees.
Perhaps that's an Indian form of Keynesian pump priming. Famously, economists have said, you could take a bag of money, dig a hole, put the money in the hole, cover the hole, and then hire people to dig it up. And that would help the economy, because you want to inject money into the economy. This is what happened after the pandemic in the United States. The United States got it more right than anyone else. And it meant that the effects of the pandemic were relatively mild.
You can't do it forever, as you said. How do you pay for it? And this is the point, is that government expenditure on infrastructure in populist schemes has crowded out private investment. Private investment is low, okay? So private investment is running really low. And we are seeing a classic dumbbell-shaped economy, or we talked about the K-shaped recovery in America, wherein the rich benefit but the poor go down, as in a K. But what do I mean by a dumbbell economy? And this is what Manu Sharma, our colleague in India, who's an economist and a very good investor and a very wise chap, a very good pollster as well. And he says that you give subsidies to the super rich, to the billionaires. Why? Because you say we want to create chaebols, which will power India's industrial growth. Fine. And you give subsidies to the poor. So the weight keeps getting bigger on both sides of the dumbbell, and the bar, the middle class is getting narrower and narrower. So this dumbbell economy, where the burden is falling disproportionately on the middle class when it comes to taxation, when it comes to work, we could go on. The reality is, the reason why this is alarming is it's not just a BJP problem. It's fashionable to blame Narendra Modi alone. And of course, our title is a bit eye-catchy, and we use the word vegetarian Stalinism. And there's a reason, because he's very oppressive. But if you look at the broader economic philosophy, every party is promising freebies. The Congress, the grand old party of India, led by Rahul Gandhi, the grandson of Indira Gandhi, the great grandson of Jawaharlal Nehru, a man with high energy who's walked from the south to the north. He's very much, the blue-blooded heir of the Nehru dynasty. Congress is the original socialist party. They don't see a rollback of the state. They don't want a freer market. The Samajwadi Party in Uttar Pradesh, my ancestral state, which has 240 million people, the very name Samajwad means socialism. So Samajwadi Party literally means the Socialist Party of India, or Socialist Party. That's it. So you've got that. You've got the Aam Aadmi Party, which was very much adored initially by the middle class as a party that would offer better public services, cleaner governance, and in some ways, it tried, but it too got engulfed in corruption scandals. And this new populist party, which was in power in Delhi and is now in power in Punjab, is also left-leaning. It promises free electricity, free water supply, lots of freebies. The Trinamool Congress in West Bengal, the eastern state, also, a highly populated state. We are talking of numbers well north of 100 million here, 100, 200 million. So these are big, very populated areas. So West Bengal is run by a former Congress leader and was ruled by communists for decades. And it is basically a basket case. There is no business now in West Bengal. Kolkata, the former imperial capital of British India, is a shell. Let's talk about Dravida Munetra Kazhagam. I'm not a Tamil speaker, so apologies to all our Tamil listeners. The DMK in Tamil Nadu. Well, it's relatively better. Tamil Nadu has manufacturing. It is led by a chap called Muthuvel Karunanidhi Stalin, known as MK Stalin, or just Stalin. And you've guessed right. He was indeed named after Stalin. So you can imagine his sensitivities when
Stalin
it comes to...
has been rehabilitated in
Exactly,
Moscow. So,
exactly.
Why not?
And in a nutshell, the Swatantra Party, which after independence was a free market party, Raja Gopalachari was one of the founders. The Bharatiya Janata Party, which was more free market. The Swatantra Party, Swatantra literally means freedom. That died decades ago. And Modi has taken BJP in a statist direction. So, as I said earlier, you have the BJP, the three Bs, the BJP, big business, and Babus. They've created a nexus that promotes oligopolies and monopolies. What does this mean? You have the Adani-Ambani problem. These are the two big business houses controlling everything. You have the compliance Raj that has replaced the license permit quota Raj. What this means is you have to comply with all sorts of regulations. And if you don't, you're done. You had demonetization. I promised to explain that. This happened overnight in 2016. Modi said, well, all the notes you're using, now you have to go to the bank and replace them. And of course, the ATM weren't built for the new notes. It was complete economic chaos. And if you look, growth rates dropped after that. And demonetization was a harebrained idea. I don't know who gave Narendra Modi the idea, but it was an absolute disaster with a capital D. And then, of course, he brought in the goods and sales tax, which was a jolly good idea. India had been trying to do so for a while, to have one goods and sales tax across the country so that we would, like the EU, become one economic union. Remember, I had told you that you couldn't even take stuff out of one district to another, forget from one state to another. So we were politically free, but not at all economically free. And so the goods and sales tax was a good idea. But again, he implemented it in the middle of a financial year in 2017. So imagine someone's had a heart attack, and then you get a stroke, a brain stroke. And the horrendous implementation of GST, as goods and sales tax is called, led to the death of millions of small and medium-sized enterprises, the SMEs. And as we know, most employment in any economy, even first world economies, comes from these smaller businesses. And Modi just destroyed them. And there is also another argument that economists don't make because they're scared to make, because you can't quantify precisely. There is an argument that the real economy might have shrunk because after demonetization and GST, the black economy crashed. There are estimates that this might have been as large as 60% of the Indian GDP. Some people say, it is even higher. The economists estimate it at 60%. The businessmen say, it was probably 100%. So let's say that if that is gone, so the real economy has gone down from 160 to 100. So even if the economy is growing fast over the last few years, the real economy has actually shrunk under Narendra Modi because the black economy has gone. Now, if you were astute, you would have encouraged and gently, through incentives, got, and I would argue, a lighter taxation, a lighter touch, got the black economy into a tax-paying thing. But if you are draconian, then people have an incentive to be in the black economy. Now, let me come to the most important thing, which is affecting people, which is tax terrorism. Tax terrorism, and this is Modi's own former supporters using this term. It's not me, it's not you. Tax terrorism means very simply that taxation in India has become arbitrary, extortionate, and draconian. It was always a bit like that, but now it is extraordinary in the sense that the same company, and this is an American company, was charged by the Customs Department for under-invoicing its imports and therefore avoiding tax, and by the Income Tax Department for over-invoicing that very same import and avoiding tax. Now, both of them cannot be right, cannot be simultaneously right. It is clear that both of them have targets, and tax collectors are sending out inflated tax notices to meet these top-down targets. And people have to deposit, or businesses have to deposit 10% of the amount and then fight legal proceedings, one appeal after another for 8 to 10 years in court. And there are millions of cases stuck in court, in Indian courts, for an indeterminate period. So as one of our friends has said repeatedly, the Indian system is not Kafkaesque, it is Kafka. And surprise, surprise, you have SMEs down, you have jobs down, and jobs, there are no jobs. Modi has not been able to provide any jobs. There is wage suppression as a result. There is financial repression because you can't really invest freely in India. You just can't move your money around. The animal spirits are down. Demand has cratered. Because of this compliance Raj, there has been deindustrialization. Manufacturing has gone down from 17% to 13%, a level similar to 1965. Yes, Apple is very much in India, but but if you're a small manufacturer, good luck. There has been, and this is important for US listeners and European listeners and others, and Indians indeed, they should know this too. There has been protectionism through the back door, through tariffs and non-tariffs. Thousands of quality control orders mean that if you're a small company in the Midwest or in Germany or elsewhere, you just can't get your stuff through customs. And this means that the middle classes of India pay a higher price for an inferior product. As someone said it wonderfully, a very dear friend of mine, very senior in one of India's top companies, he said that the middle class is in crisis. We are seeing a rupeeization of incomes and dollarization of expenses. I'll repeat, a rupeeization of incomes and dollarization of expenses. I'll give a very simple example. The same car costs more in India than in the US in dollar terms. And if it's a more expensive car, you may end up paying 100% duty. So US President Donald Trump is not entirely wrong when he complains about Indian protectionism. So petrol costs more in India than in the US. Why is that? Taxes. Because the government fleeces the middle class for its dumble economy to give subsidies to the poor, to freebies to the poor and subsidies to the rich. As a result, talent and capital is fleeing India. 100,000 per year was the average earlier. And it has been 200,000 plus from 2022. After COVID, the flight is huge. FIIs, foreign institutional investors, have been pulling significant money out of Indian equities since 2024 and made their biggest exit in 2025, the year that has just elapsed. FDI, which is foreign direct investment, has evaporated over the last 2 years, 2024 and 2025. So if you are an Apple, sure, you can call Prime Minister Narendra Modi if you're Tim Cook, if you're CEO Tim Cook, and your project is fine. But if you are a small company, you don't want to lock in your money in India because you don't know what you may have to do. So, and I haven't even talked about your pet issue, which is the environment. Pollution is crazy. Air, water, and soil. My parents are suffering health issues, as are so many older people, and indeed younger children under 5. Delhi is the most polluted city in the world. And water.
Well, I have a relative who was just in Delhi, and I didn't experience what he did, but he described a situation that was almost literally unlivable.
It is, by many accounts. And I can feel the difference. And water, groundwater is falling dramatically. Glaciers are melting and river flows are declining. So there are big challenges. And this is not good for future economic prospects of a still largely poor country.
Are these things that you've iterated really attributable to Modi, or are some of them because India is a country struggling with over 1 billion people who don't have a civil society, have not had education, have no capital, inherited a dysfunctional, exploitative colonial regimen, and that the world is a rough place, rather than Modi has taken a wrong turn at every corner?
Modi has not taken a wrong turn at every corner. Let's start with that straight away, because he did build infrastructure and he did manage to improve micro-welfare benefits to the people. But, and here's the big but, he has taken a wrong turn as in he has brought back all the evils of the past. All of what you say about India inheriting an exploitative, extractive colonial structure, correct. The world is a rough place, correct. India did not have the tradition of civil society because, after all, North India in particular has been under the heel of one conqueror or another from 1192. Everyone talks about the Taj Mahal, but the Taj Mahal was built thanks to oppressive taxation that led to many dying in famine. In fact, there were so many bodies of the dead, there weren't enough people around to bury them or burn them. And that is a European traveler remarking about Shah Jahan's Mughal Empire. Shah Jahan himself was locked up for 8 years by his own son. So India has not had terribly wonderful innings. And yet it was the second largest economy in the world, and life expectancy was better before the British came. So India has inherited a lot of ills from the past. The challenge or the responsibility of Narendra Modi lies in reversing the clock, or turning the tide from 1991. We were in a more positive direction after 1991. India was a more liberal economy, and India needed more liberalism, and that is what he promised. He promised minimum government and maximum governance. That was his 2014 slogan. Instead, he's given minimum governance and maximum government. Doing business in India today is like pulling teeth, your own teeth, actually. So it is incredibly painful. And he has re-centralized like Indira Gandhi in the 1970s. He has imposed a new form of emergency wherein everyone lives in fear because of the tax terrorism, because of the draconian powers of the tax authorities. There's been a complete evaporation of confidence. Animal spirits are really low, and therefore economic activity has suffered. Also, and this is where he's certainly responsible, he has no skills at the heart of the government. He has a cabinet of sycophants who are lightweights with no competence. There is a focus on slogans, not substance. In the words of a very dear friend who is an economist who's worked extensively on India, a foreigner indeed, not an Indian, he said you find lots of announcements but little implementation. Everything is half-assed. There's this approach that everything must happen now. Gets nothing done. There is an obsession with perception management. Twitter, now X, and Instagram. In fact, why go far? My own classmate, Ashwini Vaishnav, who was at Wharton with me, he and I did our MBA together. He's Rail Mantri, literally the 39th Minister for Railways, the 35th Minister for Information and Broadcasting, and the 2nd Minister of Electronics and Information Technology since 2024. So he has 3 ministries. I don't see how you can handle 3. I would struggle to just do a good job with one of them. But he's called Reel Mantri because all the time he's making Instagram reels. The finance minister, whom my mother mocks, Nirmala Sitharaman, is ignorant and arrogant. She knows nothing. She relies on IS officers around her. And both these people, Ashwini Vaishnav and Nirmala Sitharaman, in the words of the BJP spokesman himself, and one of their spokesmen is a dear friend, he said that they are unelected and unelectable. And they're there because they are lackeys.
Well, I will say I will not mention the name, I'll fudge the time, but I did work during the Cold War, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, for an ambassador who did not know that the Soviet Union had a communist government. So the Indian cabinet is not alone.
Indeed. And now, what we have is, let's take another example. We had a central bank governor called Shaktikant Das. He's an IS officer, and he studied history at St. Stephen's College, that posh college in Delhi. No longer that posh now, because everyone sends their kids abroad. But he blew 70 billion to 100 billion of foreign reserves in a misguided effort to maintain the price of the rupee. Now, guess what? In 1992, the British failed. Guess what? In 1997, the Asian currencies, the Asian, Southeast Asian and Asian nations failed. Clearly, the historian, the man who read history, supposedly read history, had read no history. And he also launched a disastrous tax-free gold scheme, meaning, you buy gold now and we'll return you a gold bond, and we'll give you the appreciation in the price of gold. It'll be it'll be tax-free too. It was a disastrous scheme that cost the government a lot. Or maybe it was his predecessor who did it, but he continued it and doubled down on it. And he was, by all accounts, an absolutely disastrous central bank governor. And he's now number 2 in the Prime Minister's office. He has been rewarded for his incompetence. So there used to be a boss of mine in London who was very witty, and he said, Atul, 2 things float to the top, shit and cream. And I'll leave it to listeners to guess who is floating at the top in India.
Well, you're describing a cataract of problems, if not calamities in the making, and it sounds that you're describing, or I think you're saying clearly that you think the system is in a heading towards what sounds like an existential crisis, not just the problems of incompetence. Is that fair to say, or is that overstated?
Absolutely fair to say. I think the future scenarios are that India muddles along the way it has muddled along for decades. It goes back to the Hindu rate of growth. After all, it has no manufacturing, it has no technology, it has no demand, it has no private investment. So, yeah, maybe it just continues. It does grow its own food grains. India is self-sufficient in food, so India can at least feed its millions. So one view is India continues. Another view is, well, there is a crisis, and there's a looming balance of payments crisis, because we know that Iran is in turmoil. It doesn't take much for the price of oil to go up. India doesn't have that many foreign exchange reserves. The Trump tariffs have hit India really hard, and India's dollar earnings have gone down. Secondary sanctions are also hurting India. And so India could end up in another 1991 scenario, a balance of payments scenario within months. And then it may reform. And many people say India does best when it is in crisis. It's only then India reforms. And so if that happens, then you get a freer market, you get less of this Stalinist state where everyone is living in fear, where everyone is keeping their money under their mattress in gold. By the way, gold imports in India have shot up. No one wants to keep their money in rupees, understandably, because the rupee is falling. It's not quite as bad as Turkey or Venezuela or Iran, but still, it's depreciating. So 1991, then people engage in economic activity. India does have good entrepreneurs. Indian big business houses get broken down a little bit. You get structural reforms, and you get 1991 revisited. After India goes to the International Monetary Fund again. That is one scenario. A third scenario is that really India, does not have the human capital, and India is facing looming institutional and environmental crises. And the south of India, which is more progressive, which is more dynamic, which has higher per capita income, which has lower birth rates, but it doesn't have political power. And the South may say, well, we don't want to subsidize the North. We don't want to subsidize Bihar anymore. And you're hearing that sentiment as well. Or they may say, we don't want to continue sending money to the Northeast. And the Northeast may turn more insurgent already. There are problems in Manipur, even in Ladakh. And that leads to the existential issue and the fear that Indian leaders have had since the very day India became independent of balkanization. And India just at some point thinks the center cannot hold, things fall apart. William Butler Yeats transpires. So at any given point in time, there are a range of scenarios. And what follows is not necessarily inevitable or written in the stars. It depends on the choices Indians make and Indian leaders make in the coming days. So the worst scenario, India could, of course, disintegrate. The best scenario, India could reform and hit higher economic growth again and embrace economic freedom and indeed even political freedom, because people say we are living under a second emergency under Narendra Modi. And the third scenario is India just muddles along with no proprietary technology, no manufacturing, but manages to feed its people and be a middle-level power for a long time.
I am at a loss almost as to where to go with the apocalyptic future. Perhaps I will just continue to look away. That's the
I have said
solution.
there is hope. There's hope if there is reform. I mean, look, India has a lot of people. India has dynamic entrepreneurs. India has a fair degree of human capital. There is no reason why the Indians living in Dubai and Singapore and US and UK and else, Australia and Canada and so many other countries couldn't go back and use the demographic dividend over the next 20, 30 years and sell goods and services.
With a change in election, or
I think more than election, they have to structural reform. They need to roll back the compliance Raj. They need to shut down tax terrorism. They need to clip the wings of the IAS, and they need professionals. They need an economist or someone who understands economics and business as head of the Reserve Bank of India. They need someone. They need someone in the finance ministry who actually understands finance, not someone who got through. And I have literally met an IAS officer who studied English literature and was in finance and hated it. And she complained incessantly about being in finance. What she really wanted to be in was the Ministry of Health and work on infant, under 5 health, the health of infants and infant mortality and all that. And she was literally crying tears of blood once in private and saying, I hate this, I hate numbers, I hate being here. And so if India can rationalize, and that is not that difficult, you can at least begin with the finance ministry and the Reserve Bank of India. So we don't have to be all doom and gloom. And there are plenty of Indians who are exceptional at finance.
My positive historical words of soothing are that Rome wasn't built in a day, and it's taking an American administration almost 4 years to destroy a much larger country than Rome. So perhaps India has time to.
Indeed. I mean, look, it almost seems that US President Donald Trump has been inspired by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And he has gone even further than Modi to do to the Fed what Modi did to the RBI. And the end result of interfering in institutions like central bank, which is basically
we're taking
the guarantor.
Venezuela.
Yeah, or the guarantor of your monetary system is unwise. And I think we hopefully once Narendra Modi is not immortal, he's old. As Rima goes, he is in ill health. And it is a cabal around him. P.K. Mishra, Shaktikant Das, the IAS officers around him who are running the country, and perhaps the Home Minister Amit Shah, they are running the country together. But as these older people go, as and when the crisis comes, there will be reform, and India will rise again. And remember, India came into its own after the 1991 crisis, when all seemed lost, when its godfather, the Soviet Union, was gone.
I anticipate that this will be characterized as a presentation for the opposition. But
no. We've spelt out that we are not in favor of either the Socialist Congress Party or the Socialist Party called the Samajwadi Party. We are very much advocating a freer market, more checks and balances, a more responsible politics, which is not competitive populism. We are not doing a podcast for the opposition at all. We are saying, for heaven's sake, get a grip. All political parties have inner party democracy. get rid of competitive populism and reform.
Okay. We can hope.
On
And
that note,
advocate.
thank you, Glenn, for a wonderful conversation. And we will be back.
For enlightening us.
Thank you. And our viewers, our listeners rather, here, please make sure you like this podcast on whatever platform you're using, whether it is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, or YouTube. We will be back soon.
Very good.
Bye.